He came home to find his wife dead, stabbed over 50 times. He broke down, called 911, swore he had nothing to do with it. But the police didn't believe him. Neither did the jury. He was sentenced to life for a murder he didn't commit. And while he sat in prison, the real killer gave interviews, smiled in photos, and fooled the entire country. This is the twisted, true story of Betsy Faria, the friend who was betrayed, the husband who was framed, and the woman who turned murder into performance art. December 27, 2011. Troy, Missouri. Russ Faria arrived home after a game night with friends to find his wife, Betsy, sprawled on the living room floor. She had been stabbed 55 times. Blood was everywhere. A knife was still lodged in her neck. Russ collapsed. He called 911. He was hysterical, said she must have killed herself, then corrected himself. He didn't know what happened, but investigators quickly locked in on one theory. He did it. No forced entry, no sign of robbery, and they thought his 911 call sounded too rehearsed. Russ was arrested 2 days later. Within weeks, he was on trial and convicted. But there was one problem. The actual killer had already been inside the house, and she'd made sure her name stayed far from suspicion. Betsy Faria had stage 4 cancer. She was undergoing chemotherapy. She knew her time was limited, but she was hopeful. She was fighting. And just a week before her death, she made a change to her life insurance policy, $150,000 in benefits. Originally, her husband Russ was listed as the sole beneficiary, but in a quiet visit to the library with a notary, she removed his name and added Pam Hupp, a woman she called her best friend. Pam claimed it was for safekeeping. Said Betsy didn't trust Russ, but Betsy had told others she didn't really want to make the change, that she felt pressured. And when her body was found, her phone and laptop were wiped clean. Only one person knew she'd been feeling uneasy. And that same person was the last person to see her alive. Pam Hupp, a former life insurance agent turned suburban manipulator. She had inserted herself into Betsy's life just months earlier, under the guise of being a supportive friend. She drove Betsy to chemo appointments, took her out for lunch. She also constantly talked about death, inheritance, and murder. Pam was the last person to see Betsy alive. She drove her home, told police they hugged, that Betsy was happy. But her stories changed. First, she said Betsy stayed up to watch TV. Then she said Betsy was tired and went straight to bed. Later, she claimed Russ was already home when she dropped Betsy off, something 4 witnesses and time-stamped receipts proved wasn't true. And yet, no charges, no arrest. Pam became a prosecution witness against Russ, and the cops let her walk. Betsy was stabbed 55 times, most of the wounds to her wrists, neck, and head. The crime scene looked frantic, but to trained eyes, it looked staged. Her socks were still on. There were no defensive wounds on her hands. She never had a chance to fight back. Someone had caught her off guard. The knife used didn't belong to the kitchen set. Blood patterns suggested she'd been attacked while seated, likely after being drugged or weakened. And the killer wiped surfaces down. Carefully. There were no fingerprints, no blood trails leading out, only a dog bowl overturned, and Betsy's phone missing. The killer didn't rush. She stayed long enough to erase Betsy's text history, long enough to take her phone, long enough to stage everything. Russ was convicted in 2013, despite having 4 alibi witnesses, time-stamped receipts, and cell phone data, placing him 30 miles away at the time of the murder. But 2 years later, his conviction was overturned. A retrial was granted. This time, the new judge allowed evidence against Pam Hupp. The jury took less than an hour to acquit Russ, and suddenly, all eyes were on Pam. In 2016, Pam staged a bizarre fake kidnapping. She lured a mentally disabled man named Louis Gumpenberger to her house, shot him dead, and told police he was trying to kill her on behalf of Russ Faria. But surveillance and forensic evidence proved she planted the story. She planted fake notes. She used a burner phone to lure him. It was a setup designed to frame Russ again. But this time, it didn't work. Pam was arrested for murder, and suddenly, investigators reopened Betsy Faria's case. This all happened in Lincoln County, Missouri, a town where personal favors and small-town assumptions replaced forensics and logic. The lead investigator had a working relationship with Pam Hupp. The prosecutor ignored glaring inconsistencies in her story. And Betsy's own family believed Russ was innocent. They tried to tell police. They were ignored. For years, Pam lived freely. She cashed out the $150,000 life insurance policy meant for Betsy's daughters. She built a room onto her house, bought a new car, and tried to murder someone else to keep the original lie alive. But she couldn't keep it up forever. Pam Hupp now sits in a Missouri prison, charged with the first-degree murder of Betsy Faria. She claims she's innocent, but the evidence, the recordings, the lies, it all points in one direction. Betsy's story is a tragedy. Russ's story is a nightmare. And Pam Hupp? She reminds us that not every killer hides in the shadows. Some smile, some hug you goodbye, and some cash the check before your body's even cold. Subscribe to Curell Case Files for more true stories of justice, betrayal, and the dangerous people hiding in plain sight.